My name is Helena. I own one of the most renowned hotels in the city, a business I inherited from my father and spent years transforming into a true empire of hospitality. Hotel Aurora was famous for its discreet luxury, for its impeccable details, and most of all, for the service I always considered to be the very heart of our business. But over the years, something began to trouble me. Guest comments about staff indifference, reports of rudeness at the front desk, even complaints that the manager treated people differently depending on who they were. Of course, not every online review is true, but there was a pattern, a recurring tone suggesting that hospitality was being replaced by arrogance. I couldn't accept that, so I decided to do something bold, visit my own hotel, not as the owner, but as a simple guest. I carefully prepared my disguise. I left aside my designer clothes, tied my hair into a messy bun, put on plain glasses, and carried a worn-out suitcase. In the mirror, the successful businesswoman was gone. What remained was just an ordinary woman, perhaps even a little weary. As I walked through the revolving doors of Hotel Aurora, I felt a mix of pride and nervousness. The lobby was immaculate, crystal chandeliers reflected the soft light, the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Everything seemed perfect, until my eyes landed on the reception desk. There stood Mr. Marcos, the manager, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, upright posture, and eyes that seemed to measure everyone who walked in. I knew he was considered efficient, but I had also heard rumors about his authoritarian temper. I took a deep breath, approached the desk, and said, "Good afternoon. I'd like to book a room for tonight." He looked me up and down, first my makeup-free face, then my worn suitcase. His expression shifted subtly, as if assessing whether I was worthy of the place. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked curtly. "No. I thought I'd check availability now." He gave a short, almost ironic laugh, and shook his head. "Our hotel usually receives a more exclusive clientele. I don't think we have anything available for you." I felt my blood boil. I knew the hotel inside out, and I was fully aware that there were dozens of vacant rooms that week. He was judging me by my appearance. "Could you at least check?" I insisted, trying to stay calm. He didn't even bother. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he replied, "Please look for another place. This hotel isn't for just anyone." The words cut deep. For a moment, I considered revealing my identity right there, but something stopped me. Instead, I stood still, staring at him, while he was already calling another staff member, clearly impatient with my presence. And it was in that instant I realized everything the guests had complained about was true. He really was turning people away simply because they didn't fit into the standard he deemed acceptable. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but one thing was certain: in that very moment, a decision was born within me, one that would change not only the manager's life, but the entire hotel. What he had no idea of was that the ordinary guest he had just humiliated was, in fact, the owner of the very place he worked in. And when the truth came out, it would be anything but pleasant. That night, after being humiliated in my own hotel lobby, I checked into a modest inn a few blocks away. The place was simple, nothing compared to the Aurora's crystal chandeliers and velvet carpets, but the staff smiled at me the moment I arrived. They treated me with kindness, asking if I was tired from my journey, offering me tea, and even carrying my worn suitcase without hesitation. It was ironic. The very essence I wanted my hotel to stand for, warmth and care, I found not in my own property, but in a far smaller establishment. That realization hit me harder than Marcos's dismissive words. I sat by the window of my small rented room, watching the lights of Hotel Aurora shine in the distance. My heart was torn between rage and disappointment. Rage at Marcos for daring to decide who belonged in my hotel, and disappointment at myself for being blind to what was happening under my watch. But I am not the type of woman who breaks down. No, when faced with betrayal or disrespect, I plan. The next morning, I returned to the Aurora, again in my disguise. This time, I observed silently. I sat in the lobby for hours, pretending to read a magazine while watching the flow of guests. And I saw it with my own eyes. A young couple, clearly tourists, approached the reception desk with wide smiles. Their clothes weren't designer, and their English was broken, but they were polite. Marcos glanced at them the same way he had looked at me, cold, disdainful. He whispered something to one of the receptionists, and within minutes, the couple was told there were no available rooms. I knew, of course, that was a lie. Minutes later, a wealthy-looking businessman strolled in. Polished shoes, a leather briefcase, and the confidence of someone who thought the world belonged to him. Marcos transformed instantly. He greeted the man with a bow, spoke with honeyed words, and escorted him personally to a suite. I felt a fire burn inside me. It was not just about me anymore. It was about every guest who had been silently judged, mistreated, and turned away from what was supposed to be a sanctuary of welcome. That night, I sat down with my notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of the page: Operation Exposure begins. I wasn't going to confront him immediately, that would be too easy. No, Marcos needed to reveal his true nature not just to me, but to the entire staff, and perhaps even to the public. He needed to be caught in a way that no excuse, no false charm, and no connections could save him from. So I devised a plan. First, I would book a team of mystery guests, ordinary people from different backgrounds. Some well-dressed, some modest, some foreigners with accents, and some locals. I wanted to see, with evidence, how he treated each one of them. I would give them hidden cameras, disguised as buttons and pens, to record every interaction. Second, I would gather testimonies from employees. I had heard rumors of his arrogance not just toward guests, but also toward the staff. If those whispers were true, then somewhere among the maids, bellboys, or receptionists there would be someone willing to speak. And finally, the grand reveal. When the right moment came, I would enter the hotel not in disguise, but in all the authority that was mine. And Marcos, he would see the face of the woman not good enough for his hotel standing in front of him as the rightful owner of everything around him. As I closed my notebook and looked once again at the aurora from afar, I whispered to myself, "You thought you could measure my worth, Marcos. Soon, the world will measure yours." The game had just begun the following week. My plan was in motion. I had reached out to a trusted circle of people, friends of friends, acquaintances, even a few strangers recommended by business partners. Each one agreed to play a role in my silent investigation, and none of them knew my true identity. To them, I was simply Helena, the concerned researcher. One by one, my mystery guests began arriving at Hotel Aurora. I positioned myself in the cafe across the street, disguised once more, notebook in hand, heart racing every time the revolving doors opened. The first to arrive was a young man named Karim. He was from Morocco, a student traveling on a tight budget, wearing jeans and a plain jacket. I watched him walk nervously into the lobby, clutching his small backpack. Through the cafe window, I could almost feel his hesitation as he approached the reception desk. From where I sat, I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. His body language told me everything. Karim smiled politely, Marcos didn't. His eyes narrowed, his posture stiffened. After a brief exchange, I saw Marcos shake his head dismissively. Karim's shoulders slumped. He turned away, dejected, and left the lobby. I bit my lip hard, anger bubbling inside me. Strike one. 2 hours later, another guest arrived. This time it was Mrs. Clark, an elderly woman dressed modestly, with kind eyes and a cane. She had been instructed to request a standard room for one night. Again, I saw Marcos at the desk. Again, his face hardened as he looked her up and down. Within minutes, the conversation ended. She, too, was sent away. But then came the turning point. My third mystery guest was Mr. Sullivan, a businessman dressed in a crisp suit, polished shoes, and carrying a Rolex that wasn't real but looked authentic enough. I had given him strict instructions: act entitled, arrogant, and impatient. The moment Sullivan walked in, Marcos's expression transformed. The cold indifference melted into warmth. He practically rushed from behind the desk, greeting him with a wide smile and extended hand. I saw him personally arrange for Sullivan's luggage, order champagne to be sent to his room, and escort him to the elevators with a deference that was almost theatrical. I wrote furiously in my notebook, hypocrisy confirmed. But I wasn't done. That evening, my final guest arrived, a young woman named Sophia, with a heavy accent and a simple summer dress. She was nervous, pretending to be a first-time traveler. Marcos took one look at her and frowned. He whispered something to a receptionist, who shook her head uncertainly. Then Marcos snapped his fingers, visibly irritated, and motioned for her to send Sophia away. Sophia, following my script, protested softly, asking if she could at least sit in the lounge while she searched for another hotel. Marcos's voice rose, I could hear it faintly even from across the street. His words were sharp, his tone dripping with disdain. And that was when it happened. A family of 4, clearly wealthy, entered the lobby just as Marcos was raising his voice at Sophia. His expression flipped instantly. He abandoned her mid-sentence, plastered a fake smile on his face, and went to greet the new arrivals as though nothing had happened. The hypocrisy was now undeniable. That night, I gathered the recordings. Each of my mystery guests had hidden devices capturing both audio and video. I sat in my small rented room, my laptop glowing as I played the footage. With every click, every dismissive gesture, every arrogant word, Marcos was digging his own grave. But there was more. As I began speaking quietly with the staff, pieces of a darker truth emerged. The maids whispered about being scolded for the smallest mistakes, sometimes in front of guests. Bellboys admitted he kept their tips for himself, claiming it was hotel policy. One receptionist, her voice trembling, told me she had considered quitting because of the constant humiliation. The weight of their words pressed on my chest. This wasn't just about guest mistreatment anymore. This was about a toxic rot eating away at the very soul of my hotel. By the end of that week, I had everything I needed: footage, testimonies, and undeniable proof. My notebook was full, my laptop overflowing with evidence. And yet, I didn't feel satisfied. Not yet. Because Marcos still walked around my hotel lobby, head high, suit pressed, believing he was untouchable. And that, I promised myself, was about to change. The next stage of my plan would no longer be about observing. It would be about confrontation. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise. And the man who once thought I was just another unworthy guest, would soon learn exactly who I was. The week had come to an end, but for me, it felt like the beginning of a storm. I had all the pieces in place: the recordings of Marcos humiliating guests, the testimonies of staff members who finally felt safe enough to speak, and my own observations. Yet the question lingered in my mind: how should the truth be revealed? I didn't want it to be a private confrontation. That would be too simple, too easy for him to twist into a story of misunderstanding or bad timing. No, Marcos needed to be exposed publicly, in front of the very people he had deceived with his fake professionalism. So I planned my entrance carefully. On Monday morning, I dressed not as the weary traveler with a worn suitcase, but as myself, Helena, the owner of Hotel Aurora. A tailored navy suit, a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother, and the quiet but undeniable aura of authority. I no longer looked like a guest begging for a room. I looked like someone who owned every crystal chandelier and velvet chair in that lobby. Before leaving, I sent discreet messages to my allies, the mystery guests, the employees who trusted me, and even a small team of legal advisors. They were instructed to wait in the cafe across the street, ready to enter at my signal. When I walked through the revolving doors, time seemed to slow. The lobby looked the same as it always did: gleaming floors, golden accents, the smell of lilies. But to me, everything felt different. This was no longer just a building. It was a battlefield. And there he was. Marcos stood at the reception desk, straightening his tie, his expression sharp as always. He didn't recognize me immediately. For a few seconds, he squinted, as if trying to place my face. Then, when he realized I wasn't carrying the old suitcase, wasn't wearing glasses, wasn't hiding behind the disguise, he dismissed me as just another wealthy client. He approached with his usual counterfeit charm. "Good morning, madam. Welcome to Hotel Aurora. Do you have a reservation?" I smiled, not the smile of a guest, but the smile of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. "Yes," I said calmly. "I have a permanent reservation. For the last 15 years, in fact." He blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "You will." I turned slightly and gestured toward the door. On cue, the cafe across the street emptied. One by one, my mystery guests entered the lobby, followed by staff members who had chosen to stand with me. And finally, my advisors, carrying folders and a laptop, ready to display the evidence. The murmur in the lobby grew. Guests sitting in the lounge turned to watch. Employees paused mid-task. A silent anticipation filled the air. "Marcos," I said, my voice carrying through the hall, "you don't recognize me, do you? He frowned, a bead of sweat forming near his temple. I'm afraid not, madam. Should I? I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Last week, you threw me out of my own hotel. Gasps rippled through the staff. Marcos's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Yes, I continued, my tone sharper now. You looked at me, judged me by my clothes, my suitcase, and decided I wasn't worthy of staying here. You didn't even bother checking for a room. And do you know why that matters, Marcos? I paused, turning to the staff and guests around us. Because I am Helena Giet, the owner of Hotel Aurora. The woman you disrespected wasn't just another guest. She was the very person who built this place into what it is today. The silence was absolute. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I gave a signal. One of my advisors opened the laptop, connecting it to a projector kept for corporate meetings. Within seconds, the large screen in the lobby lit up. The first video played, Karim being turned away, then Mrs. Clark, then Sophia. Each clip showed Marcos's disdain, his arrogance, his hypocrisy. The final footage revealed him berating a receptionist while charming a wealthy client seconds later. Whispers grew into outrage. A woman in the lounge shook her head in disgust. A staff member muttered, "I knew it." Marcos stumbled forward. "Madam, I can explain." "No," I cut him off, my voice steady, firm. "You can't explain away arrogance. You can't explain away humiliation. And you cannot explain away stealing tips from my staff." More gasps. Employees nodded, some with tears in their eyes, finally validated. I looked directly at him, my eyes cold. "You forgot what this hotel was built on. Not marble, not crystal, not velvet. Hospitality, respect, humanity. You stripped it away and replaced it with your ego." His face was ashen now, his mouth opening and closing like a drowning man searching for air. "Pack your things, Marcos," I said, my voice carrying the finality of a gavel strike. "You are finished here." The lobby erupted, some with applause, some with relieved sighs, others with murmurs of shock. The staff who had suffered under him exchanged glances of hope, almost disbelief. Guests looked at me with admiration, as if they had just witnessed justice unfold before their eyes. Marcos, trembling, tried to protest one last time. You can't just," but I raised my hand, silencing him. "You will leave this hotel today. And I will make sure your name never tarnishes another establishment again." He froze, defeated. His shoulders slumped. The mighty manager who once thought himself untouchable now looked small, broken, and exposed. As security approached to escort him out, I turned to the staff. "This is not an end, it's a new beginning. The Aurora will once again be a place where every guest, no matter their background, is treated with dignity. And it starts today." The lobby burst into applause. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud not just of the building, but of the soul I was about to restore to it. And as Marcos disappeared through the revolving doors, I knew one thing: this was only the start of rebuilding not just a hotel, but a legacy. When the echo of applause finally faded and Marcos was escorted out of the hotel, I stood still for a moment in the lobby, feeling the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. His absence left a silence behind, but it wasn't empty. It was a silence pregnant with possibility, with change. Yet I knew that firing Marcos was not the victory. It was only the first step. A weed had been pulled, but the roots of distrust still remained, winding deep through the walls of Hotel Aurora. The staff had lived under his shadow for too long. Fear, humiliation, favoritism, all of it had left scars. To truly restore Aurora, I needed to do more than remove a corrupt manager. I needed to rebuild the culture from the ground up. That same afternoon, I gathered the staff in the grand conference hall. Some entered hesitantly, whispering among themselves, unsure what would happen next. Others looked relieved, but cautious. Their eyes carried questions: would things really change? Or was this just another performance? I stepped to the front, no podium, no barrier between us. "Today," I began, my voice carrying across the room, "you saw the truth. You saw how one man twisted what Hotel Aurora stood for. But let me be clear, this is not about him anymore. This is about us, about you, about the values we choose to uphold from this day forward." I saw faces soften, eyes lift. This hotel was founded on hospitality. That means kindness to strangers, respect for workers, Dignity for every soul who walks through these doors. No one here is lesser, not the guest who carries an old suitcase, not the maid who works through the night, not the bellboy who smiles even when his feet ache. Everyone matters. I paused, letting the words sink in. From today onward, I make you a promise. No staff member here will ever again feel invisible. No guest will ever again feel unworthy. Aurora will not just be a building, it will be a family. For a moment, there was silence. Then one of the maids, Rosa, her uniform worn but spotless, raised her hand timidly. Madam, does this mean we can speak freely now? Without fear? I smiled gently. Not only can you speak, you must. Your voices are the heartbeat of this place. And I will listen. That broke the dam. One by one, staff members began speaking, first cautiously, then with courage. They spoke of the humiliation they endured, the stolen tips, the unfair punishments. Some cried as they recounted stories they had bottled up for years. Others confessed that they had almost quit, but stayed because they loved the guests, loved the work, but hated the management. I listened, I wrote, I promised change. And then, change began. Within days, I implemented the first of many reforms. The tip transparency policy. Every guest tip would now go directly and fully to the staff member who earned it. I personally signed the new rule into law, making it unbreakable. The voice of the staff, a council of employees, elected by their peers, would meet with me monthly to bring concerns and suggestions. No more secrets, no more whispers in corridors. Training with heart. I brought in specialists not to teach mechanics of service, but the philosophy of hospitality, empathy, patience, kindness. Because anyone can pour a glass of champagne, but not everyone can make a guest feel at home. Recognition and growth. I introduced a program where outstanding employees would be honored every month, not just for efficiency, but for acts of kindness noticed by guests and peers. And more importantly, those employees would be offered real opportunities for advancement. But perhaps the most important change was invisible, the atmosphere. Slowly, the heaviness lifted. Smiles became genuine. Conversations between staff and guests grew warmer. Employees who had once moved like shadows now stood taller, prouder. The guests' return news travels fast. Within weeks, stories of my dramatic confrontation with Marcos spread through the city. At first, I feared scandal. But what blossomed was admiration. Guests old and new came not just for the chandeliers or velvet chairs, but because they wanted to stay in a hotel where dignity was the standard. The same couple Marcos had once turned away. I personally invited them back. This time, they were welcomed with open arms. Karim, the student, received a complimentary stay. Mrs. Clark, the elderly woman, was given a room with a view and staff to assist her with anything she needed. And Sophia, the nervous traveler, she cried when I greeted her myself at the door. It wasn't about luxury anymore. It was about redemption. One evening, weeks after Marcos had left, I walked through the lobby unnoticed. Not disguised this time, but simply blending in. I watched as a bellboy laughed with a guest while helping with luggage. I saw a receptionist bend down to speak kindly to a child. I saw Rosa, the maid who had once asked if she could speak freely, smiling so widely that her whole face glowed. And I realized, the soul of Aurora had returned. I stopped by the grand window, looking out at the city lights. For years, I thought my legacy would be the building itself, the marble, the chandeliers, the architecture. But now I understood, legacy is not stone and glass. Legacy is people. And Hotel Aurora was alive again. As I turned to leave, I whispered to myself, Marcos thought he could measure who was worthy, but worth cannot be measured by appearance, money, or power. True worth is measured by how we treat one another. And with that, I knew this was not just a victory for me, it was a victory for everyone who believed that respect, dignity, and kindness were the real luxuries the world needed. Months passed, and Hotel Aurora was no longer simply recovering from the shadow Marcos had left, it was glowing brighter than ever before. The transformation that had begun as an act of justice grew into something larger than I could have imagined. What had once been a scandal whispered about in hushed tones now became a story of redemption shared across cities, and then across borders. Travel magazines picked it up first. Owner disguises herself, exposes arrogant manager, rebuilds hotel with heart. Soon after, bloggers and journalists began writing about Aurora not as a place of marble and velvet, but as a place of humanity. Our reputation, once polished only by wealth, was now built upon compassion. I began to notice the shift not only in our guests but in the kind of people who wanted to work with us. Talented young professionals applied not just because of Aurora's name, but because they had heard of its heart. I interviewed many of them myself, looking into their eyes, searching for that spark of kindness, that quiet willingness to serve not out of obligation, but out of care. And one by one, they joined us, bringing new life and energy to every corner of the hotel. The staff who had once felt invisible were now proud ambassadors of our values. Rosa, the maid whose voice had trembled when she first asked if she could speak freely, was promoted to supervisor. Her leadership was not loud, not harsh, but steady and warm. Guests adored her, staff respected her, and I often found myself thinking that Aurora's future was safer in her hands than it had ever been in mine. The bellboys, once timid, now greeted guests with confidence, their laughter echoing through the lobby like music. Even the receptionists, once drained by fear, carried themselves with dignity, knowing that their voices mattered. And then came the first invitation from abroad. A prestigious hospitality conference in Paris wanted me to share Aurora's story. At first, I hesitated. I had always been more of a builder than a speaker, more comfortable making changes behind the scenes than standing on a stage. But then I remembered why I had started this journey. It was never just about one hotel, it was about the idea that hospitality must always be rooted in respect. Perhaps it was time to share that truth beyond our walls. Standing before hundreds of industry leaders in a grand Parisian hall, I told the story. I spoke of my disguise, of Marcos's arrogance, of the humiliation I endured in my own lobby. I spoke of the recordings, the testimonies, the courage of my staff, and the transformation that followed. I did not sugarcoat the pain, nor did I hide my own mistakes. The audience sat in silence, their eyes fixed on me, as I ended with a simple truth: luxury without dignity is emptiness. But dignity without luxury is still wealth beyond measure. The applause that followed was thunderous, but what mattered more were the faces of the young hoteliers who came to me afterward, their voices trembling with inspiration as they said, "You showed us what hospitality really means." After Paris came London, then New York, then Tokyo. Invitations poured in, and with them came opportunities. Investors wanted to expand Aurora internationally. Journalists wanted documentaries. Guests wanted to experience the hotel of dignity they had read about. And while the temptation of rapid growth sparkled before me, I hesitated. Growth was easy, true to values. That was harder. Back in my office overlooking the city skyline, I stared at the plans spread across my desk. Proposals for new branches in Dubai, Singapore, Los Angeles. My advisors urged me to seize the moment, to ride the wave of global attention. But I knew the danger. Expansion could dilute the very soul I had fought so hard to reclaim. If I let Aurora grow without care, it could become just another chain, a brand without a heart. I could not let that happen. So I made a decision that shocked many. Aurora would expand, but slowly, deliberately, with the same care I gave to each guest who walked through the lobby. For every new branch, staff would be trained not only in skills, but in values. Every manager would be chosen not for their ability to impress investors, but for their ability to listen, to empathize, to respect. As the months turned into a year, I traveled constantly, balancing the weight of growth with the responsibility of integrity. In New York, I personally trained receptionists on how to treat every guest equally, whether they wore designer suits or second-hand coats. In Tokyo, I sat with maids and cooks, eating with them in the staff cafeteria, listening to their stories. In Dubai, I turned down an investor who wanted to cut costs by reducing staff, telling him plainly, "You cannot serve people by stripping away those who serve." Aurora became more than a hotel. It became a movement, a standard, a reminder to the world that true luxury was not chandeliers or golden cutlery, but the feeling of being valued. Guests left not only with photographs, but with stories of kindness: how a bellboy helped carry their luggage in the rain, how a maid tucked a handwritten note beside their pillow, how the owner herself once stopped to ask if they were comfortable. But with fame came new challenges. Competitors tried to imitate us, branding themselves with slogans of hospitality with heart, though their actions betrayed them. Journalists searched for cracks, critics waited for us to stumble. And deep inside me, the fear lingered: what if one day, I fail to protect what I built? What if another Marcos rises, hidden in plain sight? One night, after a long day of travel, I returned to the original Aurora. The lobby was quiet, the lamps glowing softly, the scent of lilies in the air. Rosa was at the desk, her voice gentle as she helped a lost traveler find his way. I watched silently, unseen, as the guest's shoulders relaxed, his face softened, and gratitude filled his eyes. At that moment, I realized something. Aurora was no longer mine alone. It belonged to all of them: the staff who carried its soul, the guests who trusted its promise, the legacy that had outgrown me. I was not just the owner anymore. I was the guardian of something greater than myself. I walked to the window, watching the city lights twinkle like stars, and I whispered the words that had guided me from the beginning: dignity first, always. And as the night stretched across the sky, I knew that whatever challenges came, Aurora would endure. Because it was no longer just a hotel, it was a beacon. The more Aurora grew, the more I felt the weight of invisible eyes upon me. Investors, politicians, competitors, everyone wanted a piece of what we had built. And while many came with sincere admiration, others came with sharpened smiles and hidden knives. It began with whispers. At first, I dismissed them as rumors that always follow success. A prominent hotel chain in the United States had begun quietly lobbying against us, accusing Aurora of unfair marketing practices, though all we had ever done was tell the truth. Then, in Europe, a series of articles appeared, claiming that Aurora's kindness movement was merely a carefully constructed story to manipulate guests into loyalty. I knew the reports were planted by those who feared the shift in power that Aurora represented. But lies, even when baseless, are dangerous when repeated often enough. The first real strike came from within. A new manager, handpicked for our upcoming branch in Singapore, was discovered falsifying expense reports. Worse still, he was treating his staff with the same arrogance Marcos once embodied. When the evidence reached me, I felt an ache in my chest, a haunting echo of the past. Had I been blind again? Had I trusted too easily? I flew overnight to Singapore. I entered the half-finished hotel, still smelling of fresh paint and sawdust, and confronted him directly. His excuses were slick, his smile polished. He reminded me so much of Marcos that for a moment, I almost felt dizzy. But this time, I did not hesitate. I dismissed him immediately, in front of his staff. Their eyes widened with shock, but also with relief. Later that night, one of the youngest housekeepers approached me shyly and whispered, "Thank you, no one has ever stood up for us like that." Her words burned into me, a reminder of why I had to stay vigilant. But even as I fought one battle, another began brewing. In Dubai, a powerful investor tried to pressure me into altering Aurora's model. He wanted to cut staff benefits, increase automation, and turn our hotels into glossy machines rather than living spaces of warmth. "Efficiency is the future," he told me smoothly. "Feelings don't make profit." I looked him straight in the eye and answered, "Then Aurora is not for sale." His expression hardened, and I knew then that this was not the last time he would test me. As months rolled on, the challenges multiplied. Anonymous threats arrived in emails. Lawsuits were filed without merit, designed to drain our time and money. Social media campaigns tried to smear my name, calling me a fraud, a manipulator, a hypocrite. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my body heavy with exhaustion, my mind whispering doubts. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just a woman who got lucky, and now the world is waiting for me to fall. But every time the doubts threatened to consume me, something small would pull me back. A letter from a guest in London, thanking Aurora for treating her disabled son with dignity. A message from a young receptionist in Tokyo, who said working at Aurora had given her confidence for the first time in her life. The sight of Rosa, still standing proudly in the original lobby, smiling at strangers as if each one was a gift. These were my anchors. These were my proof. Then came the breaking point. A major competitor, one of the largest chains in the world, launched an aggressive campaign against us. They spread lies, bribed officials, and even attempted to lure away our staff with promises of higher pay. And when none of it worked, they turned darker. One evening, after a conference in New York, I returned to my hotel suite and found a letter slipped under the door. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. It read, "Aurora cannot belong to one woman. Step aside, or we will take it from you." For the first time since Marcos, I felt true fear. Not for myself, but for the people who trusted me. For the maids who carried Aurora's soul. For the receptionists who embodied its smile. For the guests who came to us seeking comfort and dignity. What if I failed them? What if this movement I had ignited was crushed under the heel of greed? I sat alone in that hotel room, staring at the city lights outside, and realized something crucial. Aurora could no longer depend on me alone. If it remained tied only to my hands, it would always be vulnerable. I had to let it belong to everyone who believed in it. The next morning, I gathered my senior staff from around the world for an emergency meeting. In that room, with faces from every corner of the globe staring back at me, I made a decision that would change everything. We will not fight this war with silence, I said. We will not hide in shadows. We will stand tall, together, and show the world that Aurora is more than a brand. It is a family. It is a promise. And no corporation, no threat, no lie can take that away unless we let them. And so, we launched our counterattack not with money, not with lawyers, but with transparency. We opened our doors to journalists, showing them our staff rooms, our pay structures, our training programs. We released videos of our employees sharing their own stories, unfiltered and real. We invited guests to speak publicly about their experiences, not with rehearsed testimonials, but with raw truth. What happened next stunned even me. The world responded not with skepticism, but with overwhelming support. Hashtags trend, articles praised our courage, and Aurora became more than a hotel. It became a symbol of resistance against the cold machinery of corporate greed. The competitor who had tried to bury us found themselves buried instead, under the weight of public trust shifting toward us. But the battle was not without cost. I received more threats. The stress weighed heavily. At times, I felt my strength waning. And yet, every time I looked at the faces of my staff, the maids, the cooks, the bellboys, the receptionists, I found the fire again. And in that fire, I discovered a truth that would guide me forever. Aurora's soul was not mine to protect alone. It lived in every person who carried its values, in every guest who felt its warmth. I was only its guardian, but the guardianship was shared. That night, as I stood once more in the original Aurora, the place where it all began, I looked at the bustling lobby, the staff moving gracefully, the guests smiling, and I whispered to myself, they tried to take it, but they never understood. You cannot steal a soul. And so, with the storm still raging outside, Aurora shone brighter than ever inside, its light spreading across the world, carried not by me alone, but by everyone who believed in what we had built.